Hello, 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 greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of green across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horse, and welcome back, my dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, to the um. Hold on a moment. Horse, what was my line again? Oh, yes, yes. Study. Hello there, hello there, hello there. Sorry, had a bit of a brain fog there. Hello there, Yulin20. Welcome, 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 all you fine, marvelous scholars, wherever you may be, whatever planet you may be on, and whatever universe you are in. I hope you are doing well. How are you all doing, my dear scholars? Hmm, goodness. Oh my goodness. Hmm. Yulin20, fantastic, great, marvelous. I'm trying to think of other words, but I can't think of anything else. Oh, oh well. It's good to have you all here. As you probably noticed this morning when I posted, unfortunately, I posted accidentally the Psychonauts preview card rather than the one for tonight, which was because Virgil decided he was going to switch them on me. Not funny. He's back there laughing. But as you are aware, we are actually doing a reading stream tonight. Yulian20, naughty, naughty. Yes, indeed, very naughty. We are doing a reading stream tonight, my dear scholars. Um, so otherwise, it's been quiet. It's been okay. If you hear any noise in the background, we do have some visitors here in the study. The odd dimensional traveler, you know the type. They slip in, they slip out, they make a mess of the books. They leave me to clean up the mess. Those sorts. But yes, I digress. Tonight, my dear marvelous scholars, we will be reading more of Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped, given to us courtesy by Kintron. Oh, hello there, Private Maverick. Welcome. For shame, indeed. For shame. For shame. Um, so let us see. Kidnapped, 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 kidnapped. Where were we? Ah, yes. For those who are late to the story, those who came in late, the story of Kidnapped is about one David Balfor, whose father has passed away and who was given a letter which he was to deliver to his uncle Ebenezer Balfour. A lot of uncles who, a lot of not so great uncles seem to be named Ebenezer for some reason. Anyway, this uncle tried to kill David, so David locked him up, and then David let him out, and then David trusted him, and then the uncle sold him onto a ship for to send him to the West Indies to become a slave. Uh, you know what? The thing I'm getting out of this book is David is not particularly the brightest person on the planet. Um, why would you trust? Why would you turn your back on a man who tried to kill you once and then instantly decide to trust him? Nevertheless, it's just yes, he just seems a bit yes. Anyway, my dear scholars, as we left the story, the young cabin boy on the ship that David is currently stuck on was killed by another man, and so now David has taken the role of cabin boy. And things have gotten pretty bad for David. So, my dear scholars, shall we delve right in to the world of Kidnapped and see what other wonderful things will happen to our bright, intelligent, somewhat. I would call him a hero, but I don't know if that actually counts in this story. Julian20, yes please. All right. My dear scholars, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking. Dim the lights, And we will read Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. I have to hydrate right away. Chapter 9. The Man with the Belt of Gold. More than a week went by, in which the ill luck that had hitherto pursued the Covenant upon this voyage grew yet more strongly marked. Some days she made a little way, others she was driven actually back. At last we were beaten so far to the south that we tossed and tacked to and fro the whole of the 9th day, within sight of Cape Wrath, and the wild rocky coast on either hand of it. There followed on that a council of the officers, and some decision which I did not rightly understand, seeing only the result. That we had made a fair wind of a foul one, and were running south. The 10th afternoon there was a falling swell, and a thick, wet, white fog that hid one end of the brig from the other. All afternoon when I went on deck, I saw men and officers listening hand over the listening hard over the bulwarks for breakers, they said. And though I did not so much as understand the word, I felt danger in the air and was excited. Breakers being, of course, very heavy waves. Maybe about 10 at night I was serving Mr. Reich and the captain at their supper, when the ship struck something with a great sound, and we heard voices saying out. My two masters leapt to their feet. "They're struck!" said Mr. Reich. "No, sir," said the captain. "We've only run the boat down." And they hurried out. Another thing about this book, those who have been listening before, many of the characters in this book are Scottish, so I am attempting my best Scottish accent for this. The captain was in the right of it. We had run down a boat in the fog, and she had parted in the midst and gone to the bottom with all her crew but one. This man, as I heard afterwards, had been sitting in the stern as a passenger, while the rest were on the benches rowing. At the moment of the blow the stern had been thrown into the air, and the man, having his hands free, and for all he was encumbered with a frieze overcoat that came below his knees, had leaped up and caught hold of the brig's bowsprit. It showed he had luck and much agility and unusual strength that he should have thus saved himself from such a pass. And yet, when the captain brought him into the roundhouse, and I set eyes on him for the first time, he looked as cool as I did. He was smallish in stature, but well set, and as nimble as a goat. His face was of a good open expression, but sunburnt, very dark, and heavily freckled, and pitted with the smallpox. His eyes were unusually light, and had a kind of dancing madness in them that was both engaging and alarming. And when he took off his greatcoat, he laid a pair of fine silver-mounted pistols on the table, and I saw that he was belted with a great sword. His manners, beside, were elegant, and he pledged the captain handsomely. Although I thought of him at the first sight that here was a man I would rather call my friend than my enemy. I mean, if he's that well armed, yes, I agree with David. The captain, too, was taking his observations, but rather of the man's clothes than his person. And to be sure, as soon as he had taken off the greatcoat, he showed forth mighty fine for the roundhouse of a merchant brig, having a hat with feathers, a red waistcoat, breeches of black plush, and a blue coat with silver buttons and handsome silver lace. Costly clothes, though somewhat spoiled with the fog and being slept in. "I'm vexed, sir, about the boat," said the captain. "There are some pretty men gone to the bottom," said the stranger, "that I would rather see on the dry land again than half a score of boats." I'm trying to remember Host Season's voice. "Friends of yours," said Host Season. "You have none such friends in your country," was the reply. "They would have died for me like dogs." "Well, sir," said the captain, still watching him, "there are more men in the world than boats to put them in." "And that's true, too," cried the other with spirit. "And ye seem to be a gentleman of great penetration." "I have been in France, sir," says the captain, so that it was plain he meant more by the words than showed upon the face of them. "Well, sir," says the other, "and so has many a pretty man, for the matter of that." "No doubt, sir," says the captain, "and fine coats." "Oho!" says the stranger, "is that how the wind sits?" And he laid his hand quickly on his pistols. "Don't be hasty," said the captain. "Don't do a mischief before you see the need of it. Ye've a French soldier's coat upon your back, and a Scotch ton in your head, to be sure. But so has many an honest fellow in these days, and I dare say none the worst of it." "So," says the gentleman in the fine coat, "are ye of the honest party?" Meaning, was he a Jacobite? For each side in these sort of civil broils takes the name of honesty for its own. Oh, okay. My dear scholars, would you like a short history lesson? Give me 1 second. We have a visitor. I think they're almost done. Don't worry, we'll be right back. Okay, my dear scholars, it looks like our visitor has moved on. So, as I promised, let's have a short history lesson before we continue on the story. I'll see you in the chat area where I will begin our history lesson. All right, so we are going to learn today, my dear wonderful scholars, a little bit about the Jacobites, the Jacobite Revolution, and the Glorious Revolution, of which the Jacobite Revolution was, of course, a part of. All right, sit back, relax, and please take notes. So, to further begin this little lesson, it's important to understand somewhat the start of it. Um, so, to begin with, let's begin with the English monarch Charles the First. Charles the First was a English king who believed in the idea of the divine right of kings. Which, if those who don't know, the concept behind the divine right of kings is that a monarch's power is derived from God itself only, and that no man has any say in what a monarch wishes to do. Um, Charles the First came into conflict with Parliament, which then resulted in what became known as the English Civil War. It was not the first English Civil War, of course. There were several before that, including the Anarchy, but that's beside the point. Um, Charles I, it was a battle between what was called the Royalists and the Parliamentarians, also known as the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. The Parliamentarians won, and Charles I was eventually executed. His son fled to France, where later on he returned after the monarchy was restored, and that was Charles II. Now, Charles II had a son named James II, and James II was. There were some concerns about James II for many of the English nobility as well as the powers of Parliament. Several worries. One, they were worried he was a little too Catholic. For those who don't know, Great Britain and England is a Protestant country, so having a Catholic on the throne at the time was considered a no-no. I think it still is. But they were also worried because James II was a little too in love with the divine right of kings, which was another thing, again, that Parliament was a little worried about. Eventually, James II was overthrown, where William of Orange, as well as his wife Mary, Mary was James II's daughter, were invited to take the throne of Great Britain. Now, why this is important with this story is at the time there were several attempts by what was called the Stuarts. The Stuarts. They were the Stuarts. I almost forgot. By the Stuart line to return to England and retake the throne. Several attempts. At the time that this story is talking about, there was an attempt by what was his name? Well, they called him Bonnie Prince Charlie. I believe he was Charles Stuart, who tried another attempt at once again wrenching the throne from at that point was the Hanovers, which was I believe George the First, who was on the throne at the time. Um, the Scottish group, not Scottish group, but I'm trying to. I'm sorry. I'm starting to. Let me get a drink of water so I get my brain back in gear. Those who were the supporters of Bonnie Prince Charlie, also known as the King over the Sea, or was it Prince over the Sea? I can't remember. Were known as the Jacobites. Jacobite, Jacob, James, that sort of thing. Which culminated in the Battle of Culloden Moor, which ended in a resounding British victory. After Culloden Moor, there was almost no attempts at taking the throne again, and many of the Jacobites fled to France. Um, so, what this book is referring to when they talk about Jacobites, and you'll hear this more in the story, is this specific period of history in, well, the history of England. And as they say, now you know the rest of the story. So let's go back to the reading room and continue our reading. Aha. Okay, let's see. I always love history. I love giving little history lectures like that. Why, sir, replied the captain, I am a true blue Protestant, and I thank God for it. It was the first word of any religion I had ever heard from him, but I learnt afterwards he was a great churchgoer while on shore. But for all that, says he, I can be sorry to see another man with his back to the wall. Can ye so indeed? asked the Jacobite. Well, sir, to be quite plain with ye, I am one of those honest gentlemen that were in trouble about the years 45 and 6, and, to be still quite plain with ye, if I'd got into hands with any of the red-coated gentry, it's like you would go hard with me. Now, sir, I was for France, and there was a French ship cruising here to pick me up. But she gave us the go-by in the fog, as I wish from the heart that ye had done yourself. And the best that I can say is this, if ye can set me ashore where I was going, I have that upon me will reward you highly for your trouble. Yulin 20, it is fascinating. I know, it's fascinating. I love that history. In France, says the captain, no, sir, that I cannot do. But where ye come from, we might talk of that. And then, unhappily, he observed me standing in my corner, and packed me off to the galley to get supper for the gentlemen. I lose no time, I promise you, and when I came back into the roundhouse, I found the gentleman had taken a money belt from about his waist, and poured out a guinea or two upon the table. The captain was looking at the guineas, and then at the belt, and then at the gentleman's face. I thought he seemed excited. Half of it, he cried, and I'm your man. The other swept back the guineas into the belt, and put it on again under his waistcoat. I have told ye, sir, said he, that not one dote of it belongs to me. It belongs to my chieftain. And here he touched his hat. And while I would be but a silly messenger to grudge some of it that the rest might come safe, I should show myself a hound indeed if I bought my own carcass any too dear. 30 guineas on the seaside, or 60 if ye set me on the Linna Loch. Take it if ye will. If not, ye can do your worst. Aye, said host Season, and if I give ye over to the soldiers? Oh, that's the captain. Is that the captain? Host Season? Yeah, it's the captain, my mistake. Aye, said host Season, and if I give ye over to the soldiers? Ye would make a fool's bargain, said the other. My chief, let me tell you, sir, is forfeited, like every honest man in Scotland. His estate is in the hands of the man they call King George, and it is his officers that collect the rents, or try to collect them. But for the honour of Scotland, the poor tenant bodies take a thought upon their chief lying in exile, and this money is a part of that very rent for which King George is looking. Now, sir, ye seem to me to be a man that understands things. Bring this money within the reach of the government, and how much of it'll come to ye? Little enough, to be sure, said host Season, and then, if they knew, he added dryly, but I think if I was to try, that I could hold my tongue about it. Ah, but I'll be gawk ye there, which means befool in these language notes, but eh, cried the gentleman. Play me false, and I'll play ye cunning. If a hand's laid upon me, they shall ken what money it is. It's kind of funny that they translate in this note begawk with befool. So it's translating one fairly obscure, antiquated word for another fairly obscure, antiquated word. I think that's I think that's hilarious. Where am I? Oh, there I am. Well, returned the captain, what must be must. 60 guineas and done. Here's my hand upon it. And here's mine, said the other. Excuse me. And thereupon the captain went out, rather hurriedly, I thought, and left me alone in the roundhouse with the stranger. Excuse me. At that period, so soon after the 45, there were many exiled gentlemen coming back at the peril of their lives, either to see their friends or to collect a little money. And as for the Highland chiefs that had been forfeited, it was a common matter of talk how their tenants would stint themselves to send them money, and their clansmen outface the soldiery to get it in, and run the gauntlet of our great navy to carry it across. All this I had, of course, heard tell of. And now I had a man under my eyes whose life was forfeit on all these counts, and upon one more, for he was not only a rebel and a smuggler of rents, but had taken service with King Louis of France. And as if all this were not enough, he had a belt full of golden guineas round his loins. Whatever my opinions, I could not look on such a man without a lively interest. "And so you're a Jacobite?" said I, as I set meat before him. "Aye," said he, beginning to eat. "And you, by your long face, should be a Whig?" So they what they the note down here says Whig or Whigamore was the cant name for those who were loyal to King George. So the Jacobites were calling any individual who was loyal to King George I, as a Whig. Well, actually, was it King George I or was it King George II? I can't remember. It was one of the two. Because by the time of King George III, it basically was over. I think. I can't remember precisely. But I think it was King George I at this point. "Betwixt and between," said I, not to annoy him, for indeed I was as good a Whig as Mr. Campbell would make me. "And that's nothing," said he, "but I'm saying, Mr. Betwixt and between," he added, "this bottle of yours is dry, and it's hard if I'm to pay 60 guineas and begrudged a dram upon the back of it." It is very hard to keep a Scottish accent consistent, I'm sorry. "I'll go and ask for the key," said I, stepped on deck. The fog was close as ever, but the swell almost down. They had laid the brig to, not knowing precisely where they were, and the wind, what little there was of it, not serving well for their true course. Some of the hands were still hearkening for breakers, but the captain and the two officers were in the waist with their heads together. It struck me, I don't know why, that they were after no good, and the first word I heard, as I drew softly near, more than confirmed me. Sorry. It was Mr. Reich crying out as if upon a sudden thought. Couldn't we wile him out on... I can't get the Scottish accent back. Couldn't we wile him out of the roundhouse? That sounds terrible. I'm sorry. Couldn't we wile him out of the roundhouse? He's better where he is, returned host Season. He hasn't room to use his sword. Well, that's true, said Reich, but he's hard to come at. Hut, said host Season. We can get the man in talk, one upon each side, and pin him by the two arms. And, or if thou not hold, sir, we can make a run by both the doors, and get him underhand before he has time to draw. I am doing terrible at this accent. Oh my goodness, but I'm having so much fun doing it. I'm sorry. I might have to, you know what? I might have to put a warning on my next stream. Horrid accents incoming. I just can't do it very well. At this hearing, I was seized with both fear and anger at these treacherous, greedy, bloody men that I sailed with. My first mind was to run away. My second was bolder. Captain, said I, the gentleman is seeking a dram, and the bottle's out. Will you give me the key? They all started and turned about. Why, here's our chance to get the firearms, Reich cried, and then to me, hark ye, David, he said, do ye kin know where the pistols are? Aye, aye. Aye, aye. Ah, gotta get the voice back. Aye, aye, put in host Season. David kins. David's a good lad. You see, David, my man, yon wonder handler man is a danger to the ship, beside being a rank foe to King George. God bless him. I had never been so be-Davided since I came on board, but I said yes, as if all I heard were quite natural. The trouble is, resumed the captain, that all our firelocks, great and little, are in the roundhouse beneath under this man's nose, likewise the powder. Now if I, or one of the officers, was to go in and take them, he would fall to thinking. But a lad like you, David, might snap up a horn and a pistol or two without remark. And if you can do it cleverly, I'll bear it in mind when it'll be good for you to have friends, and that's when we come to Carolina. So, as you can probably guess, the captain's not really going to be willing to set David free. He's doing the whole, well, if you do this, then maybe I'll think about doing something. I'll put a good word in when I drop you off to become a slave. And maybe they'll take like a few years off what you're doing. It's that sort of thing. I think David if David is smart, he will ignore this. Here Mr. Reich whispered him a little. Very right, sir, said the captain, and then to myself, and see here, David, yon man has a belt full of gold, and I give ye my word that you shall have your fingers in it. I told him I would do as he wished, though indeed I had scarce breath to speak with, and upon that he gave me the key of the spirit locker, and I began to go slowly back to the roundhouse. What was I to do? They were dogs and thieves. They had stolen me from my country. They had killed poor Ransom, and was I to hold the candle to another murder? But then, upon the other hand, there was the fear of death very plain before me, for what could a boy and a man, if they were as brave as lions, do against a whole ship's company? I was still arguing it back and forth, and getting no great clearness, when I came into the roundhouse and saw the Jacobite eating his supper under the lamp, and at that my mind was made up all in a moment. I have no credit by it. It was by no choice of mine, but as if by compulsion, that I walked right up to the table and put my hand on his shoulder. "Do you want to be killed?" said I. He sprang to his feet and looked a question at me as clear as if he had spoken. "Oh!" cried I, "there are murderers here. It's a ship full of them. They've murdered a boy already. Now it's you." "Aye, aye," said he, "but they haven't got me yet." And then he looked at me curiously. "Will you stand with me?" "That will I," said I. "I am no thief, nor yet a murderer. I'll stand by ye." "Why, yeah, why then," said he, "what's your name?" "David Balfor," said I, and then thinking that a man with so fine a coat must like fine people, I added for the first time, "Of Shaws." It never occurred to him to doubt me, for a Highlander is used to seeing great gentlefolk in great poverty, but as he had no estate of his own, my words netted a very childish vanity he had. Well, that's nice. "My name is Stuart," he said, drawing himself up. "Alan Breck, they call me. A king's name is good enough for me, though I bear it plain and have the name of no farm midden to clap to the hind end of it." And having administered this rebuke, as though it were something of a chief importance, he turned to examine our defences. The round house was built very strong to support the breaching of the seas. Of its 5 apertures, only the skylight and the 2 doors were large enough for the passage of a man. The doors, besides, could be drawn close. They were of stout oak, and ran in grooves and were fitted with hooks to keep them either shut or open as the need arose. The one that was already shut I secured in this fashion, but when I was proceeding to slide to the other, Allan stopped me. "David," said he, "for I cannot bring to mind the name of your landed estate, and so will make so bold as to call you David, that door, being open, is the best part of my defences." It would be yet better shut," says I. "Not so, David," says he. "You see, I have but one face, but so long as that door is open, and my face to it, the best part of my enemies will be in front of me, where I wish to find them." And then he gave me from the rack of a cutlass, of which there were a few beside the firearms, choosing it with great care, shaking his head and saying he had never in all his life seen poorer weapons. And next he set me down to the table with a powder horn, a bag of bullets, and all the pistols which he bade me charge. "And that will be better work, let me tell ye," said he, "for a gentleman of decent birth, than scraping plates and raxing drams to a wheen tarry sailors." What raxing mean reaching. Thereupon he stood up in the midst with his face to the door, and drawing his great sword made trial of the room he had to wield it in. "I must stick to the point," he said, shaking his head, "and that's a pity too. It doesn't set my genius, which is all for the upper guard. And now," said he, "do you keep on charging the pistols, and give heed to me." I told him I would listen closely. My chest was tight, my mouth dry, the light dark to my eyes. The thought of the numbers that were soon to leap in upon us kept my heart in a flutter, and the sea which I heard washing round the brig, and where I thought my dead body would be cast ere morning, ran in my mind strangely. "First of all," said he, "how many are against us?" I reckoned them up, and such was the hurry of my mind I had to cast the numbers twice. "15," said I. Allan whistled. "Well," said he, "that can't be cured. And now follow me. It is my part to keep this door, where I look for the main battle. In that ye have no hand. And mind and dinna fire to this side, unless they get me down. For I would rather have tenfold in front of me, than one friend like you cracking pistols at my back." I told him indeed I was no great shot. "And that's very bravely said," he cried in a great admiration of my candor. There's many a pretty gentleman that wouldn't now dare to say it. But then, sir, said I, there is the door behind you, which they may perhaps break in. Ay, says he, and that is a part of your work. No sooner the pistols charged than ye must climb up into yon bed where ye've handled where ye're handy at the windows, and if they lift hand against the door, ye're to shoot. But that's not all. Let's make a bit of a soldier of ye, David. What else have ye to guard? There's the skylight, said I, but indeed, Mr. Stewart, I would need to have eyes upon both sides to keep the two of them, for when my face is at the one, my back is to the other. And that is very true, said Allan, but have ye no ears to your head? To be sure, cried I must hear the bursting of the glass. Ye have some rudiments of sense, said Allan grimly. Let me get a little drink of water before we continue. But yes, this is something Robert Louis Stevenson, I believe, did a lot in his books, as he does tend to frame these stories in very specific points in history as a hook. He didn't so much do it in Treasure Island, although, well, no, he did somewhat, by using the era of pirates as a way to hook in the reader. Whereas in this book, he is using the Jacobite Rebellion as well as the Glorious Revolution as a backdrop for added drama and adventure in this story. It's really quite fascinating and somewhat exciting with this. So then, let's continue to the next chapter. Chapter 10: The Siege of the Round House. But now our time of truce was come to an end. Those on deck had waited for my coming till they grew impatient, and scarce had Allan spoken when the captain showed face in the open door. Oh, thank you for the posture check, Yulian20. Excuse me. Thank you, I was leaning forward a little bit. Stand! Cried Allan, and pointed his sword at him. The captain stood indeed, but he neither winced nor drew back a foot. A naked sword, says he, that is a strange return for hospitality. Do you see me? Said Allan. I am come of kings, I bear a king's name. My badge is the oak. Do you see my sword? It has slashed the heads off mair whigamores than you have toes upon your feet. Call up your vermin to your back, sir, and fall on. The sooner the clash begins, the sooner you'll taste this steel throughout your vitals. Oh my goodness, that is quite... Oh my goodness, that is quite a start to a fight. Sorry. The captain said nothing to Allan, but he looked over at me with an ugly look. David, said he, I'll mind this, and the sound of his voice went through me with a jar. Next moment, he was gone. And now, said Allan, let your hand keep your head, for the grip is coming. Allan drew a dirk, which he held in his left hand in case they should run in under his sword. I, on my part, clambered up onto the berth with an armful of pistols and something of a heavy heart, and set open the window where I was to watch. It was a small part of the deck that I could overlook, but enough for our purpose. The sea had gone down, and the wind was steady and kept the sails quiet, so that there was a great stillness in the ship, in which I made sure I heard the sound of Oh my goodness. What was that noise? Ovid, what was that noise? Oh. Okay. Sorry, apparently our visitor from earlier left something behind, so it made a noise. Just checking. Where was I? In which I made sure I heard the sound of muttering voices. A little after, and there came a clash of steel upon the deck, by which I knew they were dealing out the cutlasses, and one had been let fall, and after that, silence again. I do not know if I was what you call afraid, but my heart beats like a bird's, both quick and little, and there was a dimness came before my eyes, which I continually rubbed away, and which continually returned. As for hope, I had none, but only a darkness of despair and a sort of anger against all the world that made me long to sell my life as dear as I was able. I tried to pray, I remember, but that same hurry of my mind, like a man running, would not suffer me to think upon the words, and my chief wish was to have the thing begin and be done with. Excuse me. It came all of a sudden when it did, with a rush of feet and a roar, and then a shout from Allan, and a sound of blows, and someone crying out as if hurt. I looked back over my shoulder and saw Mr. Shawn in the doorway crossing blades with Allan. "That's him that killed the boy!" I cried. "Look to your window!" said Allan, and I turned back to my place. I saw him pass his sword through the mate's and as I turned back to my place, I saw him pass his sword through the mate's body. Oh my goodness. It was no too soon for me to look to my own part, for my head was scarce back at the window before 5 men, carrying a spare yard for a battering ram, ran past me and took post to drive the door in. I had never fired with a pistol in my life, and not often with a gun, far less against a fellow creature, but it was now or never, and just as they swam the yard I cried out, "Take that!" and shot into their midst. I must have hit one of them, for he sang out and gave back a step, and the rest stopped as if a little disconcerted. Before they had time to recover, I sent another ball over their heads, and at my third shot, which went as wide as the second, the whole party threw down the yard and ran for it. Then I looked round again into the deck house. Oh, thank you for the hydrate waste, FT wastes, and welcome! Oh, we are in the middle of quite a fight. Where am I? Then I looked round again into the deck house. The whole place was full of the smoke of my own firing, just as my ears seemed to be burst with the noise of the shots. But there was Allan, standing as before, only now his sword was running blood to the hilt, and himself so swelled with triumph and fallen into so fine an attitude that he looked to be invincible. Right before him on the floor was Mr. Shawn, on his hands and knees. The blood was pouring from his mouth, and he was sinking slowly lower, with a terrible white face. And just as I looked, some of those from behind caught hold of him by the heels and dragged him bodily out of the roundhouse. I believe he died as they were doing it. Oh, that's pretty graphic, my dear scholars. Oh my goodness. "There's one of your wigs for ye!" cried Allan, and then turning to me he asked if I had done so much execution. I told him I had winged one and thought it was the captain. "And I've settled two," says he. "No, that's not enough blood. Nah, no, that's not enough bloodlet. Tell me back again. To the watch, David. This is but a dram before meat." I settled back to my place, recharging the 3 pistols I had fired, and keeping watch with both eye and ear. Our enemies were disputing not far upon the deck, and that so loudly I could hear a word or two above the washing of the sea. It was Sean blotched it, I heard one say, meaning bungled. Another answered him with a "Whist, man, he's paid the piper." After that the voices fell again into the same muttering as before. Only now one person spoke most of the time, as though laying down a plan, and first one, and then another answered him briefly, like men taking orders. By this I made sure they were coming on again, and told Alan, "It's what we have to pray for." I'm going to Swedish accent first, so "It's what we have to pray for," said he. Unless we can, unless we can give them a good unless we can give them a good distaste of us, and done with it, there'll be nae sleep for either you or me. But this time, mind, there'll be in earnest. By this my pistols were ready, and there was nothing to do but listen and wait. While the brush lasted, I had not the time to think if I was frightened, but now, when all was still again, my mind ran upon nothing else. The thought of the sharp swords and the cold steel was strong in me, and presently, when I began to hear stealthy steps and a brushing of men's clothes against the roundhouse wall, and knew they were taking their places in the dark, I could have found it in my mind to cry out aloud. All this was upon Alan's side, and I had begun to think my share of the fight was at an end, when I heard someone drop softly on the roof above me. Then there came a single call in the sea pipe, and that was the signal. A knot of them made one rush of it, cutlass in hand, against the door, and at the same moment the glass of the skylight was dashed in 1,000 pieces, and a man leaped through and landed on the floor. Before he got his feet, I had clapped a pistol to his back, and might have shot him too, only at the touch of him, and him alive, my whole flesh misgave me, and I could no more pull the trigger than I could have flown. Ugh. He had dropped his cutlass as he jumped, and when he felt the pistol whip straight round and laid hold of me, roaring out an oath, and at that either my courage came again, or I grew so much afraid as came to the same thing, for I gave a shriek and shot him in the midst of the body. He gave the most horrible, ugly groan, and fell to the floor. The foot of a second fellow, whose legs were dangling through the skylight, struck me at the same time upon the head, and at that I snatched another pistol and shot this one through the thigh, so that he slipped through and tumbled in a lump on his companion's body. There was no talk of missing any more than there was time to aim. I clapped the muzzle to the very place and fired. Oh my goodness. I think when they mean the very place, I think this means that David delivered a headshot. Which is, oh my goodness, this is violent. Oh. Julian 20, ew. It's violent. This is a violent story. I might have stood and stared at them for long, but I heard Alan shout as if for help, and that brought me to my senses. He had kept the door so long, but one of the seamen, while he was engaged with others, had run in under his guard and caught him about the body. Alan was dirking him with his left hand, but the fellow clung like a leech. Another had broken in and had his cutlass raised. The door was thronged with their faces. I thought we were lost, and catching up my cutlass, fell on them in flank. But I had not time to be of help. The wrestler dropped at last, and Alan, leaping back to get his distance, ran upon the others like a bull, roaring as he went. They broke before him like water, turning and running, and falling one against another in their haste. The sword in his hands flashed like quicksilver into the huddle of our fleeting enemies, and at every flash there came the scream of a man hurt. I was still thinking we were lost, when lo, they were all gone, and Alan was driving them along the deck as a sheepdog chases sheep. Give me 1 second, I need to get more water. The chapters are a little bit longer tonight, I think. And I can tell you, my dear scholars, it is such a relief to be reading a book with chapters. Oh my goodness. Yet he was no sooner out than he was back again, being as cautious as he was brave. And meanwhile the seamen continued running and crying out as if he was still behind them, and we heard them tumble one upon another into the forecastle, and clap to the hatch upon the top. The roundhouse was like a shambles. 3 were dead inside. Another lay in his death agony up across the threshold. And there was Alan and I, victorious and unhurt. He came up to me with open arms. "Come to my arms!" he cried, and embraced, and kissed me hard upon both cheeks. "David," said he, "I love you like a brother. And oh man," he cried in a kind of ecstasy, "am I no bonny fighter?" Thereupon he turned to the 4 enemies, passed his sword clean through each of them, and tumbled them out of doors one after the other. As he did so he kept humming and singing and whistling to himself, like a man trying to recall an air. Oh my goodness, Alan's kind of bloodthirsty. Only what he was trying was to make one. All the while the flush was in his face, and his eyes were as bright as a 5-year-old child's with a new toy. And presently he sat down upon the table, sword in hand. The air that he was making all the time began to run a little cleaner, and then clearer still, and then he outburst with a great voice into a Gaelic song. I have translated here, not in verse, of which I have no skill, but at least in the king's English. He sang it. He sang it often. He sang it often afterwards, and the thing became popular, so that I have heard it and had it explained to me many's the time. Hello, Doctor Zadium. Welcome. We are reading Kidnapped, and you just was. Oh my goodness! Thank you for the follow, 12358, and welcome. I am Matsu Quinox, Matsu Quinox, not Matsu Quinox. I am Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian. This is Horace, and welcome to our little study. Welcome to the study, my dear new scholar. This is what happens when you read a fight. You get so worked up with it. Oh my goodness. And it's that time once again, my dear marvelous scholars, to see if Matsu can sing a song in a book and make a tune of it. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see. Um, this song, as they say, it's not in verse, so it's gonna be kind of not gonna be good to sing. Do you want me to sing it or speak it, my dear scholars? Because Julian20, yes, sing. Dr. Zadium, sing. Oh no. Okay, let's see. Oh my goodness. Let's see if I can do a song for this. This is the song. This is the song of the sword of Alan. The smiths made it. The fire set it. Now it shines in the hand of Alan Breck. Their eyes were merry and bright. Swift were they to behold. Many the hands they guided. The sword was alone. The Dundee troop over the hill. They are many, the hill is one. The Dundee here vanish, the hill remains. It doesn't work very well. Come to me from the hills of heather, come from the isles of sea. O far beholding eagles, here is your meat. It probably sounds better in Gaelic, let's be honest. Alien 20, my how musical I am dancing. Oh, come on! Yeah, it sounds better in Gaelic probably than it would in any sort of English. Oh, okay, let's see. Where am I? Now, this song which he made, both words and music, in the hour of our victory is something less than just to me, who stood beside him in the tussle. Mr. Shawn and 5 more were either killed outright or thoroughly disabled. But of these, 2 fell by my hand. The 2 that came by the skylight, 4 more were hurt, and of that number, 1, and he not the least important, got his hurt from me. So that altogether I did my fair share both of the killing and the wounding, and might have claimed a place in Allen's verses. But poets have to think upon their rhymes, and in good prose talk, Allen always did me more than justice. In the meanwhile, I was innocent of any wrong being done me, for not only I knew no word of the Gaelic, but what with the long suspense of the waiting, and the scurrying and strain of our 2 spirits of fighting, and more than all the horror I had of some of my own share in it, the thing was no sooner over than I was glad to stagger to a seat. There was that tightness on my chest that I could hardly breathe. The thought of the 2 men I had shot sat upon me like a nightmare, and all upon a sudden, and before I had a guess of what was coming, I began to sob and cry like any child. Allen clapped my shoulder and said I was a brave lad, and wanted nothing but sleep. "I'll take the first watch," said he. "You've done well by me, David, first and last, and I wouldn't lose ye for all appin. No, no for Bredabane." I have no idea what that means. So I made up my bed on the floor, and he took the first spell, pistol in hand and sword on knee. 3 hours by the captain's watch upon the wall. Then he roused me up, and I took my turn of 3 hours, before the end of which it was broad day, and a very quiet morning, with a smooth rolling sea that tossed the ship, and made the blood run to and fro on the round house floor, and a heavy rain that drummed upon the roof. All my watch there was nothing stirring, and by the banging of the helm I knew they had even no one at the tiller. Indeed, as I learned afterwards, there were so many of them hurt or dead, and the rest in so ill a temper, that Mr. Reich and the captain had to take turn and turn like Allen and me, or the brig might have gone ashore, and nobody the wiser. It was a mercy the night had fallen so still, for the wind had gone down as soon as the rain began. Even as it was, I judged by the wailing of a great number of gulls that went crying and fishing round the ship, that she must have drifted pretty near the coast of one of the islands of the I need to pronounce this right because I know the pronunciation, but Hebrides. Oh, there it is. Drifted pretty near the coast of one of the islands of the Hebrides, and at last, looking out of the door of the roundhouse, I saw the great stone hills of Skye on the right hand, and a little more astern, the strange isle of Rum. That was quite a fight, wasn't it, dear scholars? Oh my goodness, I was not expecting that level of violence. I mean, Treasure Island in itself was a violent book, but this is just absolute bloody violence. Oh my goodness, if there wasn't a film produced nowadays of this book, oh my goodness, that scene alone. I think we have one more chapter worth that I can read tonight. Which I would love to read more chapters, but I think, yeah, these chapters tonight are fairly long. So we will read one more chapter. Well, we'll see, actually, because this next chapter looks like it's pretty short. So we'll see. Excuse me. Chapter 11. The Captain Knuckles Under. Alan and I sat down to breakfast about 6 o'clock. The floor was covered with broken glass and a horrid mess of blood, which took away my hunger. In all other ways, we were in a situation not only agreeable but merry. Having ousted the officers from their own cabin, and having at command all the drink in the ship, both wine and spirits, and all the dainty part of what was eatable, such as the pickles and the fine sort of bread. This of itself was enough to set us in good humor. But the richest part of it was this, that the two thirstiest men that ever came out of Scotland, Mr. Shawn being dead, were now shut in the forepart of the ship, and condemned to what they hated most, cold water. "And depend upon it," Allan said, "we shall hear more of them ere long. Ye may keep a man from the fighting, but never from his bottle." We made good company for each other. Allan indeed expressed himself most lovingly, and taking a knife from the table, cut me off one of the silver buttons from his coat. "I had them," says he, "from my father, Duncan Stewart, and now give ye one of them to be a keepsake from last night's work, and wherever ye go and show that button, the friends of Alan Breck will come around ye." Stewart is actually a real Scottish clan. A fairly well-known one, in fact. He said this as if he had been Charlemagne, and commanded armies, and indeed, much as I admired his courage, I was always in danger of smiling at his vanity. In danger, I say, for had I not kept my countenance, I'd be afraid to think what quarrel might have followed. As soon as we were through with our meal, he rummaged in the captain's locker till he found a clothes brush, and then taking off his coat began to visit his suit and brush away the stains, with such care and labor as I suppose to have been only usual with women. Oh, hello there, Zen. Welcome! We are reading Kidnapped. We might be finishing up. We might be reading the last chapter for the night. I'm not sure yet. I think this chapter is fairly short, so we might be able to do one more after this. Zen, I heard you're in need of someone with a particular set of skills. Am I now? What manner of skills do you have, Zen? I'm curious. Mm-hmm. Where am I? Oh. To be sure, he had no other, and besides, as he said, it belonged to a king. Zen, I can fold and roll a napkin so it looks like a flower. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Yes, we could use your skills. In fact, we could use it in the kitchen. The kitchen actually exists now. It hasn't run away yet. So yes, I could use those set of skills. For all that, when I saw what care he took to pluck out the threads where the button had been cut away, I put a higher value on his gift. He was still so engaged when we were hailed by Mr. Reich from the deck, asking for a parley, and I, climbing through the skylight and sitting on the edge of it, pistol in hand and with a bold front, though inwardly in fear of broken glass, hailed him back again and bade him speak out. He came to the edge of the roundhouse and stood on a coil of rope, so that his chin was on a level with the roof, and we looked at each other a while in silence. Mr. Reich, as I do not think he had been very forward in the battle, so he had got off with nothing worse than a blow upon the cheek. But he looked out of heart and very weary, having been all night afoot, either standing watch or doctoring the wounded. "This is a bad job," said he at last, shaking his head. "It was none of my choosing," said I. "The captain," says he, "would like to speak with your friend. They might speak at the window." "And how do we know what treachery he means?" cried I. "He means none, David," returned Mr. Reich, "and if he did, I'll tell ye the honest truth. We couldn't get the men to follow." "Is that so?" said I. "I'll tell ye more than that," said he. "It's not only the men, it's me. I'm frightened, Davy." He smiled across at me. "No," he continued, "what we want is to be shut of him." Thereupon I consulted with Allen, and the parley was agreed to, and parole given upon either side. But this was not the whole of Mr. Reich's business, and he now begged me for a dram, with such insistency and such reminders of his former kindness, that at last I handed him a pannikin with about a gill of brandy. He drank a part, and then carried the rest down upon the deck, to share it, I suppose, with his superior. A little after, the captain came, as was agreed, to one of the windows, and stood there in the rain, with his arms in a sling, and looking stern and pale, and so old that my heart smote me for having fired upon him. Allen at once held a pistol to his face. "Put that thing up," said the captain. "Have I not passed my word, sir? Or do you seek to affront me?" "Captain," says Allen, "I doubt your word is unbreakable. Last night ye haggled and argle-bargled like an applewife, and then passed me your word, and gave me your hand to back it, and ye ken very well what was the upshot. Be damned to your word," says he. "Well, well, sir," says the captain, "ye'll get little good by swearing." And truly that was a fault of which the captain was quite free. "But we have other things to speak," he continued bitterly. "Ye've made a sure hash of my brig. I haven't hands enough left to work here, and my first officer, whom I could ill spare, has got ye sold throughout his vitals, and passed without speech. There is nothing left me, sir, but to put back into the port of Glasgow after hands, and there, by your leave, ye will find them that are better able to talk to ye." "Aye," said Allen, "and faith, I'll have a talk with them myself. Unless there's nobody speaks English in that town, I have a bonny tale for them. 15 tarish sailors upon the one side, and a man and a halfling boy upon the other. Oh man, it's pitiful." Hoseason flushed red. "No," continued Allen, "that's no do. You'll just have to set me ashore as we agreed." "Aye," said Hoseason, "but my first officer's dead. You ken best how. There's none of the rest of us acquaint with this coast, sir, and it's one very dangerous to ships. I give ye your dialect. I give ye your choice," says Allen. "Set me on dry ground in Appin, or Andergore, or in Morven, or Aserg, or Morin, or in brief where ye please, within 30 miles of my own country, except in a country of the Campbells. That's a broad target. If ye miss that, ye must be as feckless as the sailoring as I have found ye at the fighting, while my poor country people in their bit cobbles pass from island to island in all weathers. Aye, and by night too, for the matter of that." "A cobble's not a ship, sir," said the captain. "It has enough daft It has nae draught of water. Well then, to Glasgow if ye list, says Allan. We'll have the laugh of ye at the least. My mind runs little upon laughing, said the captain, but all this will cost money, sir. Well, sir, said Allan, I'm nae weathercock. 30 guineas if ye land me on the seaside, and 60 if ye put me in the Linnel Loch. But see, sir, where we lie. We are but a few hours' sail from yeah, how am I pronouncing this? Annamurken, said Hoseason. Give me 60 and I'll set ye there. And I'm to wear me brogues and run jeopardy of the redcoats to please ye, cries Allan. No, sir, if ye want 60 guineas, earn them, and set me in my own country. It's to risk the brig, sir, said the captain, and your own liver along with her. Take it or want it, says Allan. Could ye pilot us at all? asked the captain, who was frowning to himself. Well, it's doubtful, said Allan. I'm more of a fighting man, as ye have seen for yourself, than a sailor man. But I have been often enough picked up and set down upon this coast, and should ken something of the lie of it. The captain shook his head, still frowning. If I had lost less money on this uncharcy cruise, says he, I would see you in a rope's end before I risked my brig, sir. But be it as ye will. As soon as I get a slant of wind, and there's some coming, or I'm more mistaken, I'll put it in hand. But there's one more. We may meet in with a king's ship, and she may lay us aboard, sir, with no blame of mine. They keep the cruisers thick upon this coast. Ye ken who, though. Ye ken who for. Now, sir, if that was to befall, ye might leave the money. Captain, says Allan, if ye see a pennant, it shall be your part to run away. And now, as I hear you've a little short of brandy in the forepart, I'll offer you a change. A bottle of brandy against 2 buckets of water. That was the last clause of the treaty, and was duly executed on both sides, so that Allan and I could at last wash out the roundhouse and be quit of the memorials of those whom we had slain, and the captain and Mr. Reich could be happy again, in their own way, the name of which was drink. Okay, my dear scholars, I'm going to give you a choice. We can try for one more chapter, or we can stop here for the night. The next chapter is, let me check. Is 9 pages long. What say you, my dear scholars? My voice is a little strained, but maybe I could try for another chapter. I'm not sure. If I hydrate a little bit more, I might be able to make it. You need 21 more? Okay, give me a second. Let me drink some water. You'll probably hear my voice is a little crackly. And we'll do one more chapter for the night. So we'll get in R4. We're actually near to halfway through this book. I'm kind of surprised. Chapter 12. I hear of the Red Fox. Before we had done cleaning out the roundhouse, a breeze sprang up from a little to the east of north. This blew off the rain and brought out the sun. And here I must explain, and the reader would do well to look at a map. You hear that, my dear scholars? Bring out your maps. On the day when the fog fell, we ran down Allan's boat, which had been running through the little Minch. At dawn after the battle we lay becalmed to the east of the Isle of Kana, or between that and Isle Urska, in the chain of the Long Islands. Now to get from there to the Linna Loch, the straight course was through the narrows of the Sound of Mull. But the captain had no chart. He was afraid to trust his brig so deep among the islands, and the wind serving well, he preferred to go by west of Tiree, and come up under the southern coast of the great Isle of Mull. All day the breeze held in the same point, and rather freshened than died down, and throughout afternoon a swell began to set in from round the outer Hebrides. Our course to go round about the inner isles was to the west of south, and so that at first we had this swell upon our beam, and were much rolled about. But after nightfall, when we had turned the end of Tiree, and began to head more to the east, the sea came right astern. Meanwhile, the early part of the day, before the swell came up, was very pleasant. Sailing as we were in a bright sunshine and with many mountainous islands upon different sides, Allen and I sat in the roundhouse with the doors open on each side, the wind being straight astern, and smoked a pipe or two of the captain's fine tobacco. It was at this time we heard each other's stories. "Oh, congratulations on getting first, blah blah." We are currently reading the last chapter for the night of Kidnapped. And yes, Horace is happy to see you, blah blah. It was at this time we heard each other's stories, which was the more important to me as I gained some knowledge of that wild Highland country on which I was so soon to land. In those days, so close on the back of the Great Rebellion, it was needful a man should know what he was doing when he went upon the heather. It was I that showed the example, telling him all my misfortune, which he heard with great good nature. Blah blah. I love Horace, and Horace cares about you too, blah blah. Only when I came to mention that good friend of mine, Mr. Campbell, the minister, Allen fired up and cried out that he hated all that were of that name. "Why?" said I. He is a man you should be proud to give your hand to." I know nothing I would help a Campbell to," says he, "unless it was a leaden bullet. I would hunt all of that name like black cocks. If I lay dying, I would crawl upon my knees to my chamber window for a shot at one." "Why, Allen," I cried, "what ails ye at the Campbells?" "Well," says he, "ye ken very well that I am an Appin Stuart, and the Campbells have long harried and wasted those of my name, aye, and got lands of us by treachery, but never with the sword," he cried loudly, and with the word brought down his fist upon the table. But I paid the less attention to this, for I knew it was usually said by those who have the underhand. "There's more than that," he continued, "and all in the same story. Lying words, lying papers, tricks fit for a peddler, and the show of what's legal over all to make a man the more angry." "You that are so wasteful of your buttons," said I can hardly think you would be a good judge of business." "Ah!" says he, falling again to smiling, "I got my wastefulness from the same man I got the buttons from, and that was my poor father, Duncan Stewart, grace be to him. He was the prettiest man of his kindred, and the best swordsman in the Highlands, David, and that's the same as to say in all the world. I should ken, for it was him that taught me. He was in the Black Watch when first it was mustered, and like other gentlemen privates, had a gillie at his back to carry his firelock for him on the march. Where the king, it appears, was wistful to see Highland swordsmanship, and my father and 3 more were chosen out and sent to London town to let him see it at the best. So they were had into the palace and showed the whole art of the sword for 2 hours at a stretch before King George and Queen Caroline. the butcher Cumberland, and the butcher Cumberland, and many more of whom I had nae mind. And when they were through, the king, for all he was a rank usurper, spoke them fair and gave each man 3 guineas in his hand. The butcher Cumberland, by the way, is was it Lord Cumberland? I think, who was at the Battle of Culloden Moor, and I believe he actually was the led the English side of it. I think. I'm trying to remember my history, and it's a bit difficult in places. My English history, I should say. So he gives the kings 3 guineas. Where was I? Now, as they were going out of the palace, they had a porter's lodge to go by, and it came in on my father, as he was perhaps the first private Highland gentleman that had ever gone by the door, it was right he should give the poor porter a proper notion of the quality. So he gives the king's 3 guineas into the man's hand, as if it was his common custom. The 3 others that came behind him did the same, and there they were on the street, never a penny the better for their pains. Some say it was one that the first to feed the king's porter, and some say it was another. But the truth of it is that it was Duncan Stewart, as I am willing to prove with either sword or pistol. And that was my father that I had, God rest him. I think he was not the man to leave you rich, said I. And that's true, said Allan. He left me on my breeks to cover me, and little besides. And that was how I came to enlist, which was a black spot upon my character at the best of times. It would still be a sore job for me if I fell among the redcoats. What? Cried I. Were you in the English army? That was I, said Allan. But I deserted to the right side at Preston Pans, and that's some comfort. I could scarcely share this view, holding desertion under arms for an unpardonable fault in honor. But for all I was so young, I was wiser than. But for all I was so young, I was wiser than say my thought. Dear, dear, says I, the punishment is death. Aye, said he, and if they got hands on me, it would be a short shrift and a lane toll for Allen. But I have the King of France's commission in my pocket, which would aye be some protection. I misdoubt it much, said I. I have doubts myself, said Allan dryly. And good heavens, man, cried I, you that are a condemned rebel and a deserter and a man of the French king's, what tempts ye back into this country? It's a braving of Providence. Tut, says Allan. I've been back every year since '46. And what brings ye, man? Cried I. Well, ye see, I weary from my friends and country, said he. France is a broad place, nae doubt, but I weary for the heather and the deer, and then I have bit things I attend to. Whiles I pick up a few lads to serve the King of France, recruits, ye see, and that's aye a little money. But the heart of the matter is the business of my chief, Ardseil. I thought they called you Chief Appin, said I. Aye, but Ardseil is the captain of the clan, said he, which scarcely cleared my mind. You see, David, he that was all my life so great a man, and come of the blood and bearing the name of kings, is now brought down to live in a French town like a poor and private person. He that had 400 swords at his whistle, I have seen, with these eyes of mine, buying butter in the marketplace and taking it home in a kale leaf. This is not only a pain, but a disgrace to us of his family and clan. There are the bairns forby, the children and the hope of Appin. There must be learned their letters and how to hold a sword in that far country. Now the tenants of Appin have to pay a rent to King George, but their hearts are starch. They are true to their chief, and what with love and a bit of pressure, and maybe a threat or two, the poor folks scrape up a second rent for odd sale. Well, David, I'm the hand that carries it. And he struck the belt about his body so that the guineas ran. Do they pay both? Cried I. Aye, David, both, says he. What? 2 rents? I repeated. Aye, David, said he. I told a different tale to yon captain man, but this is the truth of it, and it's wonderful to me how little pressure is needed. But that's the handiwork of my good kinsman and my father's friend, James of the Glens. James Stewart, that is, Ardsail's half-brother. He it is that gets the money in and does the management. This was the first time I heard the name of that James Stewart, who was afterwards so famous at the time of his hanging. But I took little heed at the moment, for all my mind was occupied with the generosity of these poor Highlanders. Get another drink of water, my dear scholars. Oh my goodness. We're going to go a little late tonight, it seems. Give me 1 second. One second. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. I call it noble, I cried. I'm a Whig, or little better, but I call it noble. Aye, said he, you're a Whig, but you're a gentleman, and that's what does it. Now, if ye were one of the cursed race of Campbell, ye would gnash your teeth to hear tell of it. If ye were the Red Fox, and at that name his teeth shut together, and he ceased speaking. I have seen many a grim face, but never a grimmer than Allan's when he had named the Red Fox. And who is the Red Fox? I asked, daunted, but still curious. Who is he? Cried Allan. Well, and I'll tell you that. When the men of the clans were broken at Culloden, and the good cause went down, and the horses rode over the fetlocks in the best blood of the north, Ardsail had to flee like a poor deer upon the mountains. He and his lady and his bands. A sair job we had of it before we got him shipped. And while he still lay in the heather, the English rogues that couldna come at his life were striking at his rights. They stripped him of his powers, they stripped him of his lands, they plucked the weapons from the hands of his clansmen. They had borne arms for 30 centuries, aye, and the very clothes off their backs, so that it's now a sin to wear a tartan plaid, and a man may be cast into a jail if he has but a kilt about his legs. One thing they couldn't kill, that was the love the clansmen bore their chief. These guineas are the proof of it, and now in there steps a man, a Campbell, red-headed Colin of Glenure. Is that him you call the Red Fox? Said I. Will you bring me my brush? Cried Allan fiercely. Aye, that's the man. In he steps and gets papers from King George to be so-called King's factor on the lands of Appin. And at first he seems small, and his hail feather well met with Shamus. That's James of the Glens, my chieftain's agent. Seamus, sorry, mispronounced that. But by and by, that came to his ears that I have just told you. How the poor commons of Appin, and the farmers, and the crofters, and the boormen were wringing their very plaids to get a second rent, and send it overseas for Ardsail and his poor bonds. What was it ye called it, when I told ye? I called it noble, Allan, said I. And you little better than a common Whig, cried Allan. But when it comes to Conan Roy, the black Campbell blood in him ran wild. He sat gnashing his teeth at the wine table. What, should a Stuart get a bite of bread, and him not be able to prevent it? Ah, Red Fox, if ever I hold ye at a gun's end, the Lord have pity upon ye. Allan stopped to swallow down his anger. Well, David, what does he do? He declares all the farms to let, and thinks he in his black heart I'll soon get other tenants that'll overbid these Stuarts and McCalls and McCobbs, for these are all names in my clan, David. And then, thinks he, Ardsale will have to hold his bonnet on a French roadside. Well, said I, what followed? Allan laid down his pipe, which he had long since suffered to go out, and set his two hands upon his knees. Ay, said he, you'll never guess that, for these same Stuarts and McCulls and McCobbs that had two rents to pay, one to King George by stock force, and one to Ardsale by natural kindness, offered him a better price than any Campbell in all broad Scotland, and far he sent seeking them, as far to the sides of the Clyde and the cross of Edinburgh, seeking and fleeching and begging them to come, where there was a Stuart to be stayed and a red-headed hound of a Campbell to be pleasured. Oh, yeah, where there was a Stuart to be starved and a red-headed hound of a Campbell to be pleasured. Well, Allan, said I, that is a strange story. And a fine one too. And Whig as I may be, I am glad the man was beaten. Him beaten? Echoed Allan. It's little ye kin of Campbell's, and less of the Red Fox. Him beaten? No, nor it will be, till his blood's on the hillside. But if the day comes, David man, that I can find time and leisure for a bit of hunting, there grows not enough heather in all Scotland to hide him from my vengeance. Man, Allan, said I, ye are neither very wise nor very Christian than to blow off so many words of anger. They would do the man ye call the fox no harm, and yourself no good. Tell me your tale plainly out. What did he next? Excuse me. And that's so good observed, David, said Allan. Troth and indeed they will do him no harm, though more's the pity. And bantering that about Christianity, of which my opinion is quite otherwise, or I would be ne'er Christian, I am much your mind. Opinion here or opinion there, said I, it's can't thing that Christianity forbids revenge. Ay, said he, it's well seen it was a Campbell taught ye. It would be a covenant world for them and their sort if there was no such thing as a lad and a gun behind a heather bush. But there's nothing to the point. This is what he did. Ay, said I, come to that. Well, David, said he, since he could not be rid of the loyal Commons by fair means, he swore he would be rid of them by foul. Ardsale was to starve, that was the thing he aimed at. And since them that fed him in his exile wouldn't be brought out, right or wrong, he would drive them out. Therefore he sent for lawyers and papers and redcoats to stand at his back, and the kindly folk of that country must all pack and tramp, every father's son out of his father's house, and out of the place where he was bred and fed, and played when he was a callant. And who are to succeed them? Bare-legged beggars. King George is to whistle for his rent. He maun dow for with less. He can spread his butter thinner. What cares Red Colin? If he can hunt Ardsdale, he has his wish. If he can pluck the meat from my chieftain's table and the bit toys out of his children's hands, he will gain harm sinning to Glenore. Let me have a word, said I. Be sure if they take less rents, be sure government has a finger in the pie. It's not this Campbell's fault, man. It's his orders. And if ye kill this Colin tomorrow, what better would ye be? There would be another factor in his shoes, as fast as spur can drive. Ye're a good lad in a fight, said Allan, but man, ye have Whig's blood in ye. He spoke kindly enough, but there was so much anger under his contempt that I thought it was wise to change the conversation. I expressed my wonder how, with the highlands covered with troops and guarded like a city in a siege, a man in his situation would come and go without arrest. It's easier than ye would think, said Allan. A bare hillside, ye see, is like all one road. If there's a sentry at one place, ye just go by another, and then the heather's a great help. And everywhere there are friends' houses and friends' briars and haystacks. And besides, when folks talk of a country covered with drifts, it's but a kind of a byword at the best. A soldier covers ne'er mair of it than his brute souls. I have fished the water with a sentry on the other side of the brae, and killed a fine trout. I have sat in a heather bush within 6 feet of another, and learned a real bonny tune from his whistling. This was it, said he, and whistled the air. And then besides, he continued, it's no sae bad now as it was in '46. The Hielands are what they call pacified. Small wonder with never a gun or a sword left from Canya to Cape Wrath. But what tenif folk have hidden in their thatch. Tenne mean careful. But what I would like to ken, David, is just how long. Not long, you would think, with men like Ardsail in exile, and men like the Red Fox sitting biding the wine and oppressing the poor at home. But it's a kinda thing to decide what folk will bear, and what they will not. Or why would Red Colin be riding his horse all over my poor country of Appin, and never a pretty lad to put a bullet in him? And with this Allan fell into a muse, and for a long time sat very sad and silent. I will the It's hard to get out of the Scottish accent. I will add the rest of what I have to say about my friend. That he was skilled in all kinds of music, but principally pipe music. Was a well-considered poet in his own tongue. Had read several books both in French and English. Was a dead shot, a good angler, and an excellent fencer with the small sword as well as with his own particular weapon. For his faults they were on his face, and I now knew them all. But the worst of them, his childish propensity to take offense and to pick quarrels, he greatly laid aside in my case, out of regard for the battle of the Round House. But whether it was because I had done well myself, or because I had been a witness to my own much greater prowess, is more than I can tell. Of his own much greater prowess is more than I can tell. For though he had a great taste for courage in other men, yet he admired it most in Allan Breck. And we'll stop right there. I think, in fact, we are right in the middle of the book. Oh my goodness, that hasn't taken us long. Oh, well, we had quite an adventure in this one. A lot of violence, a lot of Scottish accents, and a little bit of history. It's been a good night, I think. I hope you've been enjoying the story, my dear scholars. I think it's gotten better. It's gotten a little bit better from what it was in the first chapters. The first chapters did seem a little bit slower than they were previously. So then, next week, Julian 20 bit dry. Yeah, the early chapters were a bit dry. They were a bit slow to start, but it's gotten better. So, my dear scholars, next week, if everything goes according to plan, next Tuesday we will be doing more Psychonauts, and next Thursday we'll be reading more of Kidnapped. And hopefully it just stays as exciting as it was tonight. So before we go, let's see if there's anyone we can raid. You know what? Should we raid Sophia tonight? It looks like she's reading Gulliver's Travels. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. And it's been a while since we've raided her. Um, let's do that. Let's raid Sophia Ignace tonight. It might be fun. So, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, till we meet each other again at the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye bye.